Hey Sheila, welcome to the DisruptOT podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Do you want to start by talking through your career history and what attracted you to study OT?
Yeah, so I would say occupational therapy is probably my third career. I wanted to be a doctor, probably like a bunch of people, like a physician, a bunch of people that might have started this profession, thought I wanted to be a pediatrician. Um, but once I made it to university, I was like, I don't think I have the grades and the patience to continue through school. So I worked for a nonprofit and then moved to finance and corporate quality assurance, basically living in a big city. Started where my heart was and then couldn't afford to pay the bills, so had to kind of move on to things that would help me afford to live in a big city. And um, I just like I don't, my heart wasn't in it. It almost felt like it was like sucking out myself. That got really sick, and he didn't speak English. And here in the US, we have like our insurance process, medical insurance process is a little complicated. But once you are over 65, then you can qualify for government insurance. So he had the government insurance instead of private insurance, didn't speak English. And he ended up dying for something that he should have been able to be treated for if he had better medical care. So it just kind of was this push to remind me that I wanted to help people. I wanted to work in healthcare. And so occupational therapy was just holistic. And it just felt like a good fit because it looked at everything. It didn't ignore anything.
And what sort of OT fields have you worked in?
So I have worked in which is funny because I said I wanted to be a pediatrician. So one of my first internships was at an on-campus pediatric clinic. And I later worked for the schools, and it made me realize that I personally don't enjoy working with kids. It was more of, I felt like I didn't know enough and I wasn't making enough impact. I've also worked in ortho trauma, so just kind of traditional inpatient, not really rehabilitation, but straight out of surgery, working with patients straight out of surgery. And my primary experience has been working in mental health. So inpatient, outpatient, and now I'm doing community-based mental health and working with adults. So that's where I found that I felt like I don't know if it makes sense. Like I spoke the language, like, you know, I could speak to the people that I'm working with just as a regular person. They can engage with me as themselves, and I can work with them that way versus with some of the other settings. There were just so many limitations. I just felt like I couldn't do enough. I wasn't effective enough as a clinician in the other settings.
And as well as your clinical work, you're the founder of DisruptOT. Can
Yeah.
you talk about what this is and what its aims are?
Yeah. So DisruptOT started, I would say, probably at the height of the pandemic. So, well, maybe not. Our first event was in 2021, but everything started coming together at the height of the pandemic because we're all stuck at home, we're all in lockdown, and so I finally hopped on social media, hopped on Twitter, which I had been avoiding for a really long time, and I was able to connect with and virtually meet occupational therapists from different parts of the world that I otherwise would not have because I would not have been on those platforms. And so DisruptOT it's a grassroots organization. There's not like a formal structure for it. It's totally volunteer run. And our main aim is to disrupt the status quo of ableism, racism, heteronormativity, really white supremacy. Originally, it started within the profession of occupational therapy, but over the years, our speakers and our community of volunteers has included speech language therapists, physiotherapists, people from the community that aren't healthcare workers but receive healthcare. And more recently, we had a big event in March of this year. And for the first time on our panels, we included artists, activists, and healers, people that don't have a traditional healthcare role. And so the idea is really all of healthcare to disrupt that status quo of all the oppressive forces that are built into the systems of healthcare. And so the major things that we do that you'll see, especially on our social media platforms, is we do free educational events. So we make sure that we feature the global majority. We typically have speakers that are working in the community with limited resources and still doing absolutely amazing things. So this is education that is, I wouldn't even say typically, like not really, still not available in occupational therapy programs or others, and definitely not something that you're access to as a clinician. So, some of the topics that we've covered are ableism within healthcare, gender and sexuality, anti-racism. As I mentioned, we had artists and activists and healers, and so people sharing just how they resist oppressive forces. So just lots of topics. They're all free to access. All of the educational events are free. We actually pay our speakers because the people that we invite to educate us, to teach us, the speakers, are typically people who have and still are exploited. Their knowledge is extracted. They're often not given credit, usually not paid. And so it is really important for us to be equitable. And we're talking about disrupting oppressive forces, and we have to pay people for their labor, for what we learn and get from them. So that's kind of the main thing that we're doing, and through that we also are building community, because this is available to any and everybody that wants to join us. Unfortunately, most of it is in the English language, but we have used translators, we have used tech in order to translate into, I can't remember how many languages were available. I think it was like 30 languages were available for translating our live captions. So we're really also trying to build a community of people, especially people that within occupational therapy and other healthcare professions have felt left out and really purposely excluded, giving us a place where we can support each other, learn from each other, and do the things that we know are important and necessary.
Thank you. And DisruptOT attracts people from all over the world. What do you think the value is of having an international identity as an occupational therapist?
Yeah, so you're in the UK, I'm in the US. And so the reality is, if you're looking at just you're a clinician or a student, and where you are, where you live, the reality is that you're working with people from all over the world. And so our, especially within occupational therapy, but I'd say probably most health professions, all of our textbooks are Western. So mostly I would say from the US, Canada, and UK, our textbooks are being used all over the world. These textbooks they're in English, and they're not even being translated, right? These textbooks that are written in the context of the countries that they're from, they're written in English, they're being sent to countries in South America, Asia, and Africa, where English might not even be the primary language. The cultural norms are very, very different, yet clinicians are being taught this is how you do occupational therapy, or this is how you do nursing, or this is how you do whatever it is, and it doesn't necessarily apply to the people. And so if you think about, again, we're not just living in a global society where we're connected to people all over the world. There's literally people from all over the world that are, immigrating by choice. They're forcefully displaced. They didn't want to move to where they are now, but they had no choice. And so a lot of people, it's important to them to continue to value and adhere to their culture and all of the things from back home that are important to them, that are meaningful to them. And so if we don't have a clue about those things, how are we supposed to actually provide services? How are we supposed to make sure that they're able to do the things that we ask, that it's meaningful to them, and that they'll have good health outcomes if we don't know a thing about the person and their context and what's meaningful to them.
Thank you. I feel like there's so much we can learn from each other, from different countries and different cultures, and what occupational therapy means to all of us. And that's something that you really addressed in your book that you published called Occupational Therapy Disruptors. So that was published in 2023. Can you talk a bit about the inspiration behind this book and your journey of writing it and publishing it?
Yeah, so I'll start with I never thought I wanted to write. I got diagnosed later in life with ADHD, but I've always struggled to read. I've always struggled with reading comprehension. So the idea of writing just didn't make sense because I'm not an avid reader. Reading is painful for me. It's really hard. It's something I'm not good at. That's just the reality. So it's not enjoyable. And so, yeah, reading is work. Reading is work for me. So writing is even harder. And so in 2021, we did our very first DisruptOT community summit. And that was another free event, but it was a large event. So I'd say, since we did our first one, I think we've done over 20. I don't even remember the numbers. We've done a lot of free events. But this was our first event and a really big event. I think it was over, I'm forgetting if it was 2 or 3 days, but we had speakers representing 25 different countries. We had, for each event, we had several hundred people. So I think we had like over 1,500 people sign up for this first free event we did. So it was a big deal. Again, it was free. We paid our speakers. We paid our speakers really well, especially considering how little to nothing that our profession pays our speakers. But so we had all these topics that nobody was really, not nobody, these people were already doing this work, right? All of our speakers were doing this work, but there hadn't been a major or a global platform for it. So Jessica Kingsley Publishing, who's a publisher of occupational therapy disruptors, they actually reached out to me. They sent me an email and I was like, okay, is this legit? And it was legit. They were redoing their line of occupational therapy and other healthcare books, and they really wanted to have a focus on social justice. And Sarah, who's one of their editors, found out about the event and reached out because of that event. And it was basically like totally open, whatever I wanted to write about. And so I had to think about it. And I realized it was just another opportunity. Part of DisruptOT is not just to build community and disrupt these systems, but also just do it for the people. So people are already doing this amazing work, but they don't have this platform for other people to not just notice what they're doing, but to learn from what they're doing, right? And to support the work that they're doing. And so I just saw this as an opportunity to continue to do that. And so I at the time I was ambitious and I was like, all right, I'm gonna feature 25 different clinicians from 25 different countries. The book ended up with 16, but it was pretty amazing, the process. They were really, really supportive. Again, I never thought about writing a book before, and so I had no idea what I was doing. And the process was, I didn't want to speak for others. And so in being mindful and thoughtful of amplifying and elevating people's voices, I didn't want to speak for them. So the process was having an interview and basically asking the same set of questions to everyone and seeing where that leads. And so from the interviews, I wrote each chapter, and every person that was involved in the book got to review their chapter and make edits. I wanted to have it be the least labor for them, but I wanted them to be as involved as they wanted to be. And I wanted to make sure that, we had their blessing before anything was published, that they were comfortable with whatever content was included. And so there was a lot of back and forth and just kind of editing and sharing, but it was a collaborative process. And so the book's written in my voice just to kind of carry it through from the cover to cover. But everything, all the content is from each of the people that I interviewed. And I will say that it was a hard process. There were some really difficult interviews. For example, so as I mentioned, you mentioned the book came out in 2023, but the process started in 2021. And I knew from back then that the book had to be political, right? It was more than just celebrating occupational therapy, but being real about culture, politics, barriers, right? Politics, they're barriers to good health. And so I knew that Palestine had to be included. And I was honestly worried because, for, I guess, decades now, the voices of Palestinians has been silenced. And so the publisher was totally open. As I mentioned, they didn't ask me to change anything. But just the reality of Palestine in 2021 was really painful. And, I wasn't living it, but just having to re-listen to the interview, to write about it, that chapter took me probably the longest because it was really emotionally overwhelming just for me as, a person who's sitting in comfort, safety, and privilege, to be able to go through the stories and try to write it in a way that honors the person's lived experience, does justice to the words that they shared, but also doesn't diminish their experiences. I don't know what language I can use here, but hopefully it's okay to say trauma porn, right? Like I don't want to, I wanted to be respectful, and not just get people to care because of these little bits of things that are shocking. And so it was an interesting experience. The reality is I lost wages because it was way harder than I expected, took way longer than I thought. And to meet my deadline, I basically had to stop working at the end of the year so that I could just finish the book.
And every chapter's an OT from a different country, and it's such a diverse range of countries as well. Like it'll jump between Iceland to Ghana, for instance, and it just such different cultures.
Yeah. And the kind of cool thing is I don't believe there's occupational therapy in Antarctica. I know there's like a research station there, but I don't think there are any occupational therapists up there. But we've covered every continent. Obviously, each person doesn't represent their country or their region. It's just their story.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was hoping that we can kind of see the differences and also see how we're also connected.
I really love the creativity in some of the OT stories because I imagine it's the same in the US, but in the UK it's quite a sort of risk-averse culture. If we're issuing equipment from someone, it has to be from like an approved supplier. We couldn't just buy something ourselves and claim the money back from Amazon, for instance. And then there's everyone's so paranoid about getting sued for equipment that goes wrong. And then there's I think it was Victor in Uganda. He was cutting a hole out of a garden chair to make it into a commode. And brilliant, it was just brilliant. And similar things like that in refugee camps and people just making adaptations out of what they've got. So that was quite freeing for me to see that creativity being done.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, that is the amazing thing, right? That we have so many resources, and as you mentioned, that we're risk averse because we live in these litigious societies. But when you think of the needs that people have, what resources are available, you really just have to do what you can do within those confines. And it's really interesting to think about, because I've been fortunate to be able to travel. I'm Bengali, and so I would go back to India. Recently have been able to go to Bangladesh, and I'd go back every year, so I would see how disabled people would function so well in their communities without access to rehabilitation. And there's a lot that we can learn from communities. We might consider ourselves the experts because we have a degree and we might have X years of experience working in whatever setting, but it's not until you actually see how people in the communities are getting by, and they're doing some really innovative things that we probably never would have thought of because they don't have a choice.
And tell us about the upcoming DisruptOT book club.
Yeah, so you mentioned Victor. Victor is going to be our first speaker for the book club. And so it's virtual, it's free. Honestly, you don't have to read the book. So I believe it's going to be on August 17th. It's on our website, disruptot.org. The details, the link's already there. It's going to be on Zoom. And so everyone is invited, students, clinicians, academics, anybody who has a vague interest in what occupational therapists do are more than welcome to come. And it is really just going to take that the reading further, and we're not going to be going line by line through the book. It's just going to be open for Victor to share his experience and people to ask whatever questions they have. And so with DisruptOT, my I don't know, my process behind it, and I'm constantly trying to figure out, how do we get people to do more? So it's not just about giving information, but for people to take that information and take action from it. And so, when people read books or articles, or even if there's like a lecture, it's often this like one-way information exchange, right? Someone's talking at you, and then maybe you take some notes, but what do you actually do with it? I mean, think about all the conferences we all go to. We screenshot things, we ask people for their presentations, we take all these notes. How often do you actually go back and do anything with it? It's pretty rare. And so I'm hoping, the thought behind the book was to get to know each person in the book, to care about them, learn from them, figure out how you can apply those learnings in your context. So I'm hoping the book can take that process further for people, so they can learn and ask questions and make their learnings like a reality. So helping cross any barriers that they have, and also just continue that idea of building community. You got to know Victor in the book, and then you get to see him come to life, ask him questions. Victor's absolutely amazing. When you talk about like innovation and inventing things with the limited resources you have, like Victor, you mentioned that the pictures that were in the book, but he has done so many things. It was limited what we could include in the book. So I'm just hoping that people that are open to doing things differently, that want to take action, will show up, and they're welcome to ask questions, have a conversation with everybody that's there. So not a traditional book club.
Was it also Victor who he made a shower by having, it was like a tin can full of, like a large tin can full of water, and then it was attached to a string, so you'd pull a string and it would sort of slowly pull the water down.
Yeah, so in some countries it's called a jerry can, and so it's for people that don't have running water. That's how you get your water, right? You might have a well, or you might have a truck come with water to deliver once a week or something like that. And so you're filling up these jerry cans and bringing them back home. And so this is a nod to get the book so you can see these pictures. But I think Victor might even have these on his Twitter, which are freely available, and we can always ask him to post pictures of anything if you come to the book club. Victor's Victor's amazing, so I'm sure he'll be game. But it was, the adaptations were amazing, right? So if you don't have an upper limb, for example, he set it up so that you can use your feet to be able to have the water pour out and stop. And then if you don't have lower limbs, then you can use your upper extremity. So it, it like that innovation of people being able to, taking a shower has so much significance, right? Like just with, being able to start your day. For some people, there's religious significance to being able to do that, and also just like your dignity, right? So to be able to do that with such ease, you see it and you're like, oh, this makes so much sense. But how many of us would have even thought to set up anything like that?